Okay. We should be good whenever. We were discussing this before the meeting, but I'll put it on the recording here as well. We have Article 7 for you all today. We were working on Article 4, but we didn't get to a point where we thought it was ready, and we didn't want to rush get anything before we thought it was our best offer. So we do just have Article 7, but I hear we have a couple on your end of the table too. I know.
Yeah, do you guys want to go ahead and go first if you want to send it to me?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
That sounds good. Okay, that should be sending now. I apologize again for not having printed out versions. It's kind of been running around. Article 7, yeah.
That's cool.
Good, we don't have, I haven't been in it yet, we gotta take all the shutters back now, but, I had one of my buddies walk around outside and it doesn't look like we got any damage, we didn't have any, we know we didn't get any water inside, so. That's all good, internet's still out and power's been spotty, but thank God, we didn't really have any major damage.
Okay, it should be being sent to you.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for it to come in.
Okay. Sometimes it takes 30 seconds, sometimes it takes like 5 minutes. You can never.
Why don't you, I mean, I'll be able to open it in a minute, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Okay, so yeah, Article 7, obviously we've aligned this one very closely with Article 10. I think we've made it very clear time and time again that we believe these two articles are very closely related. Workload determines how much you're working per week. Stipends determine how much you're getting paid for how much you're working. So, they're two sides of the same coin. Starting with 7.1, you're going to see it's very similar to our last counter offer. We just don't agree with the word average. We know when it comes to international GAs, it's a violation of their visa to work over their 20 hours a week, a single time, not just on average. If you have a single occurrence above that, you can have issues with your visa, and we want to reflect that within the article itself and show that we are not pushing for people not to be overworked on an averagely basis, but we're saying that we, stand by all of our employees and we don't want to overwork a single time. Obviously, this does not change, how you would calculate overwork, things like that, just to say we're not doing averages, because we don't want to throw international GAs into that, that mess of, we want to make sure that they know if they are being told to work more than 20 hours a single time that they cannot be doing that. We don't want there to be any confusion on that front. So we're getting rid of that average term again, just to make that very clear on terms of that relationship. 7.2, again, you're going to see it's kind of similar to what we were working with before. It is, again, this definition describing what is, work you are paid for and what is academic work. We think this definition is fair. We use credits to define, what is expected of research assistants versus teaching assistants. We, agree that there may be overlap between these duties, and that's why we have this definition separated by credit, so we can, for any given process, for any given GA, we can say, okay, this is how much they were forced to work, this is how their academics tie into things, and we can get a starting point on, what is overwork. Because I think without a definition of what overwork is and this distinction from academic work, it's really a nebulous thing. And that's why we're not getting people who, say I am being overworked, because even though we recognize that I'm working more than 20 hours a week, I don't know where the line is between academic work and what I'm being paid to do. And so, GAU's position has been, and it remains, that we need a definition in here separating academic work from from the work we're paid for. And you know, you may not agree on the wording we've used or the hours, but we do want to have a conversation on a distinct definition that describes these two concepts separately and says how do they interact with each other and how can we apply that in a real world basis. And that is again what we're trying to go for here is, you know, separating these two avenues of what a GA is and making it very clear what they're expected to do.
Could we pause there for a second?
Yeah, of
Just to
course.
ask a question. Okay, so in line, and I know we've kind of had this conversation before, but I really want to sort of plumb this a little bit. So in lines 19 through 21,
Yes.
okay, so let's say, for example, and I realize that you don't represent students in their student capacity, and you've heard us say many, many times that we want to be very careful about, I think we've been consistent too about saying, look, we want to make sure that we distinguish between academic and employment.
Mhm.
So does GAU have an official position on for a non-research assistant student? What the expectation is in terms of how much academic work? Because you put it in these terms, I almost feel like there's a reciprocal relationship on the academic component, because we've had conversations just in our team about this. And I'm just like, I would like to know if you have a perspective on, you have it saying 1 hour per research credit they're registered for. So is the GAU position from are you taking an academic position that if I were a full-time student, not an appointee, like not a GA, but I was just a student, that I would only interact with my academic program if I was doing a 996, I would only be doing 9 hours of research a week? Is that what is being stated? Because I'm trying to separate it. We're not going to obviously bargain the academic part, but you brought it up. So I'm just kind of asking, is that the perspective?
I think the perspective is right now there is no definition of how, if I'm signed up for several research credits, but I'm also an RA, you know, how much work am I expected to be doing? Because those two things have considerable overlap. If I'm doing research with my advisor, but I'm also doing research with my advisor for my RA towards my dissertation, like how much is overwork, right? Can they expect me to do 60 hours a week and me say, well, yeah, 20 hours you're paid for, but the other 40 hours are actually just for the 5 credits you're signed up for or whatever, right? What is the limit? And, you know, if you don't agree if the issue is the word 1, and we have to change that to something that is more manageable, then we're happy to find out what, we're happy to have that conversation about where that line is. We've done it based off 1, and I said this last time, based off of that documentation that was sent out where we got closer to 1 hour per credit hour based off of, I think it was the museum and those students there. If that's the issue, then we're happy to have that conversation about what that hours look like per research credit. But we do defend that there has to be a line somewhere drawn where we can say beyond this point, no matter how many research credits you're signed up for, or based off how many research credits you're signed up for, you're still being told to work more than you should. And we want to make sure that these GAs in their research and in their student capacity are, in combination are not overworked.
I appreciate that, but I'm going to sort of diplomatically restate my question and press you a little bit. Because I appreciated the preamble, I appreciated the qualification of how you answered, but I didn't really hear a yes or no. Again, what I'm reading is that and I heard you say it was malleable. I heard that. Mm-hmm. But I feel like what I'm reading is if I were not a GA and I was working on just my own research, that I would be able to accomplish my academic work in 9 hours. Because that's what's it seems to me that it's being contemplated. It is the intention that 19 through 21 contemplates academic work or not? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out is 7.2A in the way you proposed it, specific with respect to the research assistants. Is that contemplating academic work? Is it contemplating employment work, or is it contemplating all work irrespective of the way it's described?
It is contemplating, I'm going to say in combination. I'm going to say it's everything because we are in this context of when there is overlap. If you look at 16 through 17, this is only in situations where there is considerable overlap between these two sets of duties, right? When you cannot draw a clear line between what am I being paid for and what is research credits, we need to have a line for how much should be expected to do. And so it does touch on that idea of what am I expected in terms of academics, only in the sense that, we say there is overlap, And we also agree that if I'm in 5 research credits and I'm also paid 20 hours a week, and my advisor is telling me to work 50 hours a week on this research project, that is overwork, that is excess workload, you know?
I got you.
And so that's where we're trying to have this definition in these cases where there is overlap and say, what is the line of where they shouldn't be working more? And, you know, I'm hearing you and your discussion on, you know, in this extreme case, if someone is signed up for only, you know, for 9 credits and they aren't a GA, they're only dealing with academic work, then that is a discussion I think, you know, we could have further on, you know, what is responsible in terms of how many hours per credit hour they should be expected to work. But I think we need to have that conversation and say, what is that line, especially in the context of this overlap with what a GA is already expected to do on a week-by-week basis.
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, I think that the discussion of like someone who's just a graduate student, like this wouldn't apply to them, like our contract does not apply to them, right? So I'm not sure why that is the extreme example that we're going for, because it's not a relevant example anyway,
Well, I
right?
think it's relevant in that what I don't believe, and I could be wrong, but I don't believe the intention of GAU is to take a position that that a GA would be in their student, and again, this is not part of what we would bargain. But I don't believe that GAU is taking the position that the student component of somebody who is also a GA is any less or any different in that respect of a student who is merely a student that doesn't have a graduate assistantship. So in that respect, what I'm trying to do is figure out what is the commonality in the perspective and the way you've constructed it. I guess that's what I'm saying is if I were to take someone who's not a GA and someone who is a GA, in a general sense, not necessarily what we're going to bargain in the language, what would the expectation be of the amount of time those two individuals spend in a lab environment? I guess that's what I'm, in a very sort of baseline perspective. That's all I was really trying to get at.
Yeah, and we are happy, you know, GAU is happy to have that discussion on what both sides think is an adequate, you know, representation of what should be expected of those students and of GAs in conjunction with being students as they're signed up for both things. Right now, we have it as 1 hour for research credit based off of that context we've given you before. We had given you 3 hours before, which we also thought was a fair number. And we're willing to have that discussion, but we are very clear that we want to have this discussion further.
Yeah, and I think also maybe something relevant to the discussion, although I mean, I don't think it's that relevant of like it seems a little bit of a tangent for me, but I'm thinking in terms of like people who are graduate students only, I don't think that their programs really allow that much space for just taking research credits or teaching credits, right? Like I think those spaces are left for departments who are paying their graduate assistants so that they can complete their dissertation work or their master's work. I'm not sure that graduate assistants and graduate students are taking the same amount of research and teaching credits, and maybe this, I mean, this is something that probably you guys know more
I don't
than
know.
us. What?
Everybody has the same amount of credits.
Yeah.
Credit enrollment. I think where it's a little different is, in order to receive a tuition waiver,
Mhm.
there has to be a minimum registration of 9, 9, and 6. I think that's a little bit different, but research credits, every degree program, it depends on the degree program as to how many research credits
Mhm.
prior to, if that's what you're stating.
What I
might have misunderstood.
took a master's program without funding,
Right.
and the requirements for that program were different from the requirements of obtaining the master's through the terminal PhD program at the university, right? So that the graduate student program was more course focused.
Did you do a thesis or a non-thesis?
I did do a thesis,
That's a research thesis, and the
but it
program.
wasn't at UF.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that would be, then that specific discipline would have had to propose 2 very different degree programs.
Yeah,
for
and when
master's.
curriculum and program requirements are proposed and approved for what constitutes a master's or a doctorate, nowhere in there does it take into consideration whether the students are GAs or not.
No.
It's all based on academic credit. What is the 90 credits of academic work that you need to earn the PhD? And nowhere does it say, oh, if you're a GA, it's gonna work like this, and if you're not, at least on the academic side. This is hard for me because and I know that might be part of my role on the committee.
Right.
Because I think of it all as student first, like
Right.
basically everybody's a student, everyone's here to get the degree for the academic work, and then some are fortunate enough to have the GA, the assistantship, and as you know, that's used for recruiting. So I kind of come at it from the other side, like, okay, if you're, like, if you look at our table, if you're registered for 9 credits, a graduate school will allow you to go up to 0.50 FTE, and so the primacy goes toward the 9 credits of academic work. And the assumption there is a lot more than 9 hours a week. So if you said 3, just as a hypothetical, 27 hours would be research. If you were signed up for 9 credits of research, you'd be doing 27 hours. And then grad school would say, okay, now you're permitted to work 0.50, or 0.50 is the appropriate FTE. And then it kind of comes to, well, what is that? Well, that's 20 hours. So now we're looking at 47 and saying, well, 27 hours is, yeah, it could put you up above 40, but that's the nature of an academic program. Some students, as you pointed out, are gonna take longer, some are gonna take less, but it's not hours per week on the clock, it's academic outcomes of 9 credits.
All right, well.
Sorry,
No, that's
realize
fine. No, I appreciate
I'm kind of
that.
talking out of both sides.
No, I
I'm
get
kind of
it.
thinking academically and GAU.
No, it's important because it's put in the context of, there's a relationship in terms of registration, so that's something that.
Right.
The other question, and I don't think we asked this last time, but I am interested, are you contemplating sort of any objective test for the considerable overlap that you put in line 16? Like, how would that be determined? Is it as simple as, look, your dissertation or your research is being prepared for publication with your PI, like what, even if in a practical way, like how do you
Yeah.
determine that?
I think we're open to having a conversation about what that considerable overlap works. I think in our discussions and in my mind specifically, it connects back to this kind of this clarification of FTE, we're gonna get down to 7.3, where we ask, we're having discussion on, the required duties and expectations that are required of them. And if you're signed up for research credits, obviously that is a class credit, and the professor would have to say these are the kind of the duties they're expected to be doing through these research credits. And I think we could use both of those sort of senses to say, would the schools see overlap between those two senses, at a base level? Maybe that's where you could define that overlap. And there may be other ways that may be better based off the current system, and I'm not aware of those, but that's kind of like what I would think, is that if we have these, both senses have a distinct sense of here are the duties and here's the breakdown, how long we're supposed to spend them, both for the job and for my credits, because I'm in a credit class, research class, then, how do those duties compare to each other? Is there overlap between what I'm being asked to do in terms of, specifics? If I'm being asked by my PI to do a specific duty for 20 hours a week, and then for my research credit, she says, well, we're actually doing an entirely separate project, and they don't have that overlap. Then you discuss with your PI, okay, well, how many hours are these supposed to take me? And that's a discussion you should have regardless. But when they do have that overlap, you say, well, I'm doing the same thing for both of these things. I can only work so many hours a week total to get this task done,
All right, thank you. I know that was a big sort of tangent, but those were some pretty central questions. So I appreciate you pausing to let us kind of go through those.
Of course, and I think we made it very clear, this is really important to us, and we want to be
Yeah.
fair, and we want to make sure that this is not just something that we're putting in the contract, but this is something that works for everybody involved, and we have these clear definitions to make sure GAs aren't overworked, and that the university knows what overwork is, to make sure that we don't run into those situations, right? Because no one wants to have GAs working for 50, 60 hours a week, So we have those clear lines drawn to make sure that we are boxed in properly. I will move down to 7.3 here, where we made a lot of our edits based off our previous proposals. So as you can see, we've changed, we've gotten rid of these first 2 bullet points, given the duties within the letter of appointment, and these a description whenever these duties change. For the first one, you're gonna see that kind of phrasing reappear in 4. I mean, we figured that when we're discussing what should be in the letter of appointment, we should put that in the list of things that should be in the letter of appointment. That makes perfect sense to us. So that is still gonna be in our proposal for Article 4, but we thought it just made more sense there than here, just to make sure that that list is
You're talking
correct.
about B?
No, sorry, the one that's not pointed, right below
Oh, okay,
7.3,
gotcha.
that first line, 27
Okay,
to
so you're
28.
just suggesting that be moved.
That's gonna be moved to 4, just to
Fair
make it clear,
Okay.
clear. We are still interested in having that duties and expectations within that letter of appointment and
Gotcha.
clarified. Within A, we recognize that doing it whenever these duties change, depending on the department, depending on the chair, that could be something whenever there's major changes, and it could be something whenever, week by week, your duties could change significantly. So we want to make it, not required to do those whenever the duties change significantly, just to make it easier for implementation. And we've leaned more instead in point B to just at the beginning of each semester, getting these duties clarified for each GA, depending on their teaching assignment, their research assignment, saying here are the duties you're expected to do. Here's how long you should be expected to do them each week, and things like that, just to give a general breakdown at that once a semester mark, to make it very clear when that is going on. And then with this bullet point, which I think is C, but it's 34 through 37. We just, when you request it, you can also get a description for your FTE and ensure that it complies with 7.1. Just upon request, making sure that a department can provide those sort of FTE expectations for GA or all the GAs in the department. And so, yeah, so it's a little bit different than what we've done before. We've kind of leaned away from the whenever the duties change more into this sort of on a semester basis, just to make it easier for the departments and for UF to kind of comply with that sort of stuff. And making sure that all GAs get regular updates to what they're expected to do and how that breaks down into a week by week basis.
And so what's contemplated in 7.3B, if we were to consider something like that, that is a guidance document, that's a binding document. I mean, where would that document live? Like, what would be is it a target? Is it an outline? Talk a little bit more about like the functional, and like what would the document then be used for?
I think it is in general, I think first and foremost, a guidance document. I think guidance is the best term. I think it provides GAs expectations of what they are expected to do, not only with their duties, but how long it should take them to perform some of those duties. So if you are a TA and it says, you should spend around, 3 to 5 hours a week grading, for instance, and your coursework and the number of students you have, it's leaning towards taking 10 to 15 hours to grade in a given week, then that gives you really ample opportunity to say, I am spending way more time on this than it was given to me. I don't want to get into an overworked territory. I need to have a discussion on how I can make sure I'm doing this properly with my advisor, and have those discussions to make sure either they can help you and say, well, you're actually spending too long on these things. Let's see how we can save you time, or let's have a discussion on how we can get someone in there to help you grading, so we don't have you worrying about going overwork, right? It's sort of that documentation both for the department and the GA to say, this is what we've seen in the past, this is what we expect. And if you're exceeding any of these things, then we can come back and have a discussion how we can address those issues. And if it becomes something that is chronic, I don't think this would be something that you would use as by itself clarification of someone being overworked. If someone is repeatedly going over that 20-hour margin, or they are, and it's, because this is obscene, then it becomes like an investigation on how do we go through the grievance procedure, and it goes through that process, right? So this is not going to be the end all be all of, this is what they said is required of a GA.
Yeah, I'm just one of the things that, and I know it's not exactly the same, but it's similar to some of the things we've talked about before. And there's two components that I still struggle with a little bit. The first of which is the fact that I believe to some extent, and that's why I appreciate you saying it's more of a guidance document, is that, look, people are going to have different levels of experience and skill that they bring to the table, even upon their first semester of appointment. The other thing too is that, over time, depending on how consistently they receive the same assignment, people may be more efficient at doing something than someone who hasn't done it before, or just quite frankly, isn't either doesn't like doing it. I mean, even if you're efficient and if it's a task you don't particularly enjoy, it's gonna take you longer than if it's something that you like.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, GAs can only work, if you're on a 45 FT, 20 hours a week. So if you are starting your first semester and have these duties and it is, taking you over 20 hours to do that, you have to have that discussion, say, I'm not working over, okay,
Right.
I'm going to require things. And then as you get faster, then, you can have this rolling conversation with your, PI about how do my duties shift as I'm getting more efficient to make sure I'm still at that 20-hour mark. Because, we don't want someone becoming if they become super efficient at their job, that's great. But if they're only spending 10 hours a week on it, and they're getting paid for 20 hours, we want to make sure that their duties are still keeping them at 20 hours a week. Right? We want to make sure that they're getting paid for the work they're doing hours wise.
Do you see how where, if you would scroll back up, where that creates some really serious, keep going all the way up to the top. That creates some really serious constraints by eliminating the average.
Well, we can't have an average because of international GAs. International GAs cannot go over 0.5 FTE a single time for a semester,
But it has been your proposal that you want to apply that standard to the entire bargaining unit, not just to international GAs.
I'm not sure I understand your clarification here.
Well, so right now, the CCL it's an average. There is other reasons there are other enforcement mechanisms for dealing with international GAs. You're saying you want that to be the standard for the entire bargaining unit, even for those that it's not legally required, which you've been consistent about that. You've said it.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is that do you understand how there's a constraint even within your first starting off of an assignment without the averaging mechanism? It would be you'd really have to thread a careful needle, especially in like a teaching situation, to where someone never gets more efficient or we continue to gradually add more work to that teaching assistant over the course of an 18-week semester. Or we just ensure that there's never at their most junior level of experience, we would never average it. Like, I guess that's what, like, practically speaking, I'm trying to figure out how we could even make that happen.
Right, but the other side of that coin is then you have students who are coming in, international or not, and their first week, and we're saying, well, on average, you have to work 20 hours a week. But the first week when you're getting courses set up and you're getting everything out, you could end up spending 40 or 50 hours getting a course set up and getting the Canvas shell set up and getting used to, how to draft all of the documentation you have to fill out. And that's not a situation we want to run into. You may become more efficient and get it done in 10 hours by the last week of the semester. But if your duties for the first week are taking you like 40 hours a week, which is an extreme case, obviously, then the department needs to have extra in there and be like, we know it takes longer the first week to get set up. We have an additional guidance in there to make sure that, you are only having to work 20 hours a week. That is what you're paid for. Right now, this would be a different conversation, and the average would be, a better conversation if we were salaried employees. But when we are hourly employees, but treated as salary employees in terms of you have to have duties done, that's where we have that conversation where we have to thread the needle carefully, because we're given duties and we're saying you have to have these duties done by the end of the week, which is what a salaried employee has to do. But we are hourly paid, right? And that's where it is. We're based on an hourly basis. We're not paid on getting duties done. But when you're a TA, you're paid on getting duties done, right? That's where I think we're having that disconnect, is how we connect. We're limited to 20 hours a week, but we're still based on duty accomplishment. Right? And we want to make sure that people aren't getting overworked, but we're still getting these duties done in a proper manner. And I can understand the discussion here about having an average versus not for while we're getting people up to speed and running. But I think that is not something that we can solve by putting a line in here. I think that's a discussion on the culture, making sure people get acclimated properly and that departments are prepared that first week. Maybe departments have to spend extra time making sure course Canvas shells are ready ahead of time to make sure we avoid that first week of slower time. And then the 20 hours are not spent developing these things, but are spent getting acclimated to how Canvas works and getting ready for teaching. And then you can get into teaching and hit the ground running without any sort of hitting an overwork barrier.
Yeah, I think in another respect, I'm just not, I think I'm not convinced that we'll talk about the team. I'm just not sure that the university is going to have any interest of the CBA rather than all of the federal requirements being the primary enforcement mechanism of international visas. Like, I just don't know. I'm I'm not aware of any other of that. And I know we've had that conversation multiple times, but you know, I just feel the need to say it out loud once again.
What do you mean by that? I'm sorry, can you clarify that a little bit?
Sure, so I mean, whether or not you remove the average language in here.
Yeah,
That constraint still applies to international GAs, whether or
Yeah.
not it's in the contract.
Yeah.
There is no legal compulsion to apply it to non-international GAs.
yeah,
So it appears, from my perspective, that I hear GAU saying, we need the contract to protect the visa requirements of our international GAs. You maybe didn't say it in those terms, but I feel like that's the sense I'm getting from you all.
okay,
And what I'm saying is that I personally don't believe that in the cascading regulations, statutes, requirements, and all the things that govern the way that we have to do business, I'm not so sure that the CBA is even the right mechanism to enforce a requirement that is ostensibly one set up from the federal visa program. Because, I mean, I don't see the connection. I don't understand why those have to be the same.
well, we believe that, if a GA is being paid 20 hours per week and getting a paycheck that says that they should not be expected on any given week to work over 20 hours a week. And that is especially true for those first few weeks when you are, having to get things set up and it can take you a little bit longer, We believe that workload should be clear from the get-go. And if you're paid 20 hours a week, you should be expected to work 20 hours a week and be given duties that get you to 20 hours a week. Right? We don't think that, using an average is good for some things, but we believe that it really detracts from identifying overwork and identifying when that becomes an issue. Because if you have to work 40 hours a week one week, it'll average out at the end of the day, maybe, but maybe it won't. And maybe that doesn't become an issue until you're in the last week and you're like, well, my average is over 20, but that's all because I worked 40 hours that first week. And there's no mechanism for me to say, how do I address this issue in the future? Right? We're adding mechanisms to say, you are paid a certain amount of hours per week. You were told you were working that many hours. Let's add mechanisms to say, how do we go from the number of hours you're expected to work a week to the duties that you were assigned, and make sure we have corrections in place to make sure that you are getting paid for the hours that you are dedicating to work. Right, and that's the goal we're trying to get to, which is why we're defining these limitations and adding credit hours to make sure we're going through that mechanism. That's why we want people to be given their duties each semester and how it breaks down to FTE. So they have conversations and mechanisms with their department to say, and their PI to say, how am I meeting these expectations? I know week by week what I'm expected to do. And those things will change a little bit week by week if you have a big exam to grade and things like that. But this is what you're expected to do. And I'm only paid 20 hours per week. I'm not paid 25 hours one week and 15 the next week. I'm paid 20 hours a week. So I need to do things that are 20 hours long. And that's what we're trying to get all GAs on that same standard.
I think we can move on to.
Yeah.
There's more to the article, right?
Oh, is there? I'm sorry, I thought that was the end of the.
There's a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, obviously,
no?
I don't know how much more there actually is, but obviously, the end of this section obviously is you can still go through the grievance process. The grievance process is how you address a lot of these things when they become a bigger
Can you
issue.
show what was right immediately before that, Austin?
This is the discussion. This has been crossed out. This is
Oh,
the
gotcha.
yeah, it's all green.
Right.
But this is for review through HR, and we've leaned heavily into saying, if we have an
Yeah,
issue,
you
we
walk
can
through
go,
the grievance
we go
process.
through the grievance process.
Right. But why did you leave that part out of curiosity?
Well, what, this section here?
Yeah.
We just want to make it very clear that, especially because we have this clarification on FTE that we can request, or a GA can request that, none of these, requests for a description or anything, these things prevent you from going through the grievance process, which is already true, but we want to make
Yeah.
it clear for all GAs reading this as well, that you can go through the grievance process to address these concerns. We want to make it very clear for them. This is also another big change for us. Obviously, you've made it very clear time and time again, you don't like, the standard of setting up the ending of a grievance process, and we disagree with that kind of constraint there, but we have dropped these processes where it says, if FTE is not in compliance with 7.1, here are some things that we can do to address those things. Even though we had the implement another solution, we have dropped this just to make sure we have a framework that works best for both parties here. And then, of course, we have E here, which is departments are reviewing their workloads at least once per academic year and assess the factors should be updated. So this is basically going back to that idea of departments should know how much effort it takes to run specific courses, how new GAs versus older GAs, how long they take to do these certain tasks, and make sure that they're providing reasonable work expectations of their GAs through these duties. And of course, we don't want to stop departments from making things more clear, so they can obviously make the distinction between academic and graduate duties clear as they see fit. We just don't want to constrain department from not doing that in any sense. So, as long as they're falling within the other guidelines we have set up above, then they can categorize the different aspects of their work as they see to make sure it's very clear what's expected of each GA. And then that's it. That's what we've got here for Article 7.
Okay. Any other questions? Tom? Shane or Robert, do you have any more questions about this one?
No.
All right. Thank you. It did come in, by the way. I had it.
Okay.
Came in a few minutes ago. Got that one.
Okay, yeah, and like I said, we couldn't get Article 4 finally figured out for you guys, but we do expect to have it next week. We have made significant progress. We just have to make sure that we get it right to not only say where we stand on each of these positions, make sure it's clear, make sure the definitions are clear, and making sure we're working towards that final end decision there.
Got it. All right, so we'll look forward to seeing that. So before we're going to be bringing Article 9 today. Want to go ahead and let you know that we did have an opportunity to sit down and look at Articles 8 and 16. After reviewing kind of the additional changes you made, we would like to go ahead and reassert our previous offers on Articles 8 and 16 from 9:30. I'm happy to re-email them to you, but I mean, those are the versions that we feel are going to be our best versions of that. And so we're not interested in making any more changes at this time. So 8 and 16, the 9:30 version is the one that we are reasserting.
Okay, let me bring those up just to make sure if we have any questions, we can
Sure.
have a discussion on those. I don't want to move too quickly away from those. This was Articles 9 and or
No,
8.
I'm gonna be
It's 8
bringing,
and 16.
I'm bringing 9
16.
in a minute, but 8 and 16.
Okay, let me see really quick here.
If it's not bothering anybody else, it's.
Tables and the chairs around.
Mhm. Okay, for Article 8, obviously our discussions have been limited to bereavement leave.
I wanna pull it up.
Yeah, here, I can show this really quick here. This is GAU's last proposal, but I'm gonna make it very clear, this is not UF's, this is GAU's. So, but it has it shows me where the differences are, so we can
Right.
see where we have had these discussions. Our discussion was obviously on bereavement leave,
Mhm.
paid leave following bereavement leave, and then this leave request form. Now, when we had this discussion before, obviously I wasn't here when we presented this last one. The discussion had gone through a little bit on this leave request form, and from what I remember, UF had indicated they were interested in doing that as terms of an attachment to or an appendix. Is that no longer the case here?
No, we don't have a problem. We don't have a problem adding it as an appendix, but I don't think that we're interested in bargaining the form itself. Like I said, we're happy to provide you a copy of it, but I don't think we're gonna bargain. We're not gonna bargain the process. We're not interested in bargaining or putting any more specifics about the process, and we're not actually interested in bargaining the form.
Okay. And then there was no further discussion on movement on this bereavement leave. I think we've made it very clear that, I mean, the 2 days and the 5 days is just not adequate especially for international GAs.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've made that clear, and I think that the fact that we were willing to even consider the category as a new creation was a significant concession that we felt was appropriate, and I think that we've reached the upper limit of what we're willing to consider with our previous offer.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I mean, that is, it's disappointing to hear, obviously. I think, You know, I think JU, I believe we were pretty close on a lot of those different aspects, but having nothing to kind of build off of there does not give us much discussion on having an honest rebuttal to bring back to you guys. I think I stated this last time, but I mean, I don't agree with the language of a last best final either way. I think that is it drags away from the idea of an honest bargaining and making sure that we can get to a proposal that works best for both parties. I agree with a lot of these articles. We've been back and forth a lot, and so it can be very contentious at a lot of points. But I think that the language of saying, we're not moving and having, we're not interested, I think that drags away from, at points it can be very honest. It can say, this is what we're interested, this is what we're not interested in moving towards. But having no movement and no discussion rather than, and just reverting back to a previous proposal, I don't think builds us to a conclusion. I think that for us, it detracts from bargaining in general. And so we can move on to Article 16 here. I think Article 16. Yeah, I will fix my share screen here. Article 16, once again, is let me put this on the proper window here. So this is UF's last proposal at this point. And so this is what you would be reverting back to. And this is, I mean, once again, I'm going to use the word disappointing. I think there's better terms, but that's the one that's coming to mind, especially as it relates to RTs. I think we've had honest conversation about release time. I think UF has made it clear that you may not be interested in keeping release time. That's current contract language, and I think GAU's made it very clear that we're not interested in having a discussion that gets rid of release time. And so reverting back to that is not building up to a discussion on how do we find a compromise here? How do we have the discussion? I think that's what UF has made it very clear we're trying to do. In our last proposal to you, we lowered the FTE units. We were asking for release time. We had a discussion on, not needing parking permits. We had made, concessions on notifications for a lot of these different things. And to say, well, even though you made those concessions, even though you had those discussions, we're not going to move. And in fact, we're going to leave you with this very extreme sense of deleting an entire portion of an article, that does not build us towards a conclusion. I mean, that leaves us with very few options in terms of moving forward. I mean, GAU is not going to be getting rid of release time. I don't think that's something that's on the table for us. We've had a discussion about how it translates to in terms of FTE units, and we've been very open about changing those number of units. We've been open about changing a lot of this proposal to fit closer with what UF wants. And we're not going to continue playing that game without having this honest conversation. And giving us back a previous proposal is not an honest conversation. It is just, very much a brick wall that leaves us very few options again. So it is disappointing to not have a proposal, to not have that honest conversation about where we move forward from here. And we're going to have a hard time going back to our committee meeting and figuring out where we're going to move forward in Article 16 and Article 8, to be frank. So, when you get back at Article 8 and Article 16, I would not expect things that are very substantially different from what we've given before. I don't think we're ready to say we're ready to sign, especially with Article 16. And so to give us a last best final, to go back to a previous proposal after the work we've done, I think is disappointing.
Okay. I already told you we'll be giving, so the plan is for, now that we have four, or no, not four, sorry, we have 7. I mean, we will continue to work on those 2 together, but I don't think, well, we'll see. We'll see if we can bring you one on Monday, but I'm sending now over to you Article 9.
Okay.
So I think, I actually printed out both yours and mine to have them right next to each other, because I think we're really close on this one. There are a couple statements. I'm gonna point it, oh, sorry, let me know.
Yeah, it's taking its time here, but.
And I also think that this actually was Hannah's, I know she's not here, so if you guys wanna, if you'd rather wait on this one, if that would be better, it's okay to wait if you'd prefer if we did.
I think I'd rather we have this conversation,
Okay.
and then we can always communicate it with Hannah.
All right,
Following, I'm still waiting on this email, but.
I believe the blue comments on the right, it says, I believe those are all attributed to Hannah,
Yes,
I believe, pretty sure.
And in red is your comments, or,
I'm not sure if red is,
my God.
I don't know if red is my comments. I believe red may actually be Sikander's comments. Because that was when we were back having a conversation about recording class lessons. So you guys may be able to see the version history,
Yeah.
feel with how.
yeah, I believe from reviewing this, it was Sikander's, but
I do think that it's possible that the 7R5 may have been me. Because I thought that you guys had requested the link to the actual statute, but I honestly don't remember at this point. That actually may have also been Olivia. I don't recall.
Here.
Um,
still waiting on this email.
Sam? Still nothing?
And there's still nothing. Yeah, there we go.
Like a full 5 minutes.
It took its time this time.
All the way up off the satellite and come back.
Maybe. Would have been quicker to send it for myself. Oh,
Okay, and let me share this with the Zoom. Work. Okay,
all right, so,
Should be good.
before we start, I wanna make one point about just the editing of the document. For whatever reason, the changes, the last version of changes that Hannah made, it did not show them as additional changes when I went to change it for whatever reason. So I just want to make that clear. So if there is not something, if there's something that isn't reflected in the way I describe it, please let me know and we can, let's adjust it, because that wasn't, if I say that, if I don't bring up a change that I point out and you notice that there's a change, it may not have been the intent. So
Okay.
it behaved in a funny way, and especially when we get down to the second paragraph, I'm gonna explain to you what happened. All right, so you had made some recommendations to lines 4 through 5 with some changes. I think we're good with that one, and everything in 9.1, the original 9.1 from lines 4 through 12, I think we're good on.
Okay,
So that you had recommended sort of readjusting and moving some things, and I think we're good with that. When we get down to line 14, the academic freedom article, this is one of the things that we didn't accept, and it doesn't shown up as stricken. And I'm not sure why. Previously, you guys had a sentence that went from lines 18 through 20 that read, when acting as an individual, GAs are expressly not acting in their capacity as UF employee, and therefore only obligated to adhere to policies and laws that are applicable beyond the provisions of this contract. We don't want to have that sentence in here, and part of the reason is because we believe that that is very much taken care of in lines 5 through 8 in 9.1, where it says the GA shall be free to discuss all relevant matters in the classroom, explore avenues of scholarship, research, and creative expression for their appointment, and to speak freely on all matters of university governments, and to speak, write, or act in an atmosphere of freedom and confidence. The bottom line is it's going to be really difficult to promise a predetermined test that basically says, unless you're basically at work, you're not working. There is no connection whatsoever between a GA and the university. And the way that that was written and presented, it seemed like it was, what would be the legal test for when acting as an individual? So I think that that's kind of what we would rather reflect on the language and the promises and provisions up in 9.1, where it says, you are to speak freely on all matters of university government, speak, write, and act in an atmosphere of freedom and confidence. We believe that covers it, and that provision in that sentence is not one that we like. And similarly, it shows it in green, which is a reassertion of a previous sentence that you all had deleted, which starts with the word members in the new line 18, which says members of the bargaining unit also have responsibility that includes the competent performance of duties and obligations, and the commitment to support the responsible exercise of academic freedom of others. You all had deleted that. And the comment, we're trying to read, and I don't know if you intend to include the comments or not, but Hannah's comments here are trying to draw the line in the sand about acting as an individual as opposed to an employee, but I'm not 100% sure how strongly we want to go in on this, since it's above and beyond our capacity as employees, which is the point we're trying to make. And I think that, especially with respect to when you are acting as a TA, that there is a role for you all to play with respect to the academic freedom of others, especially if you're the one in charge of the classroom. So to say that there's no connection between that, I just don't think we agree with.
well, that's because I think in a lot of this ways that we're trying to draw the distinction between what is what we are required to do from this context as employees and as an individual. And we want to make it very clear that there are points when we are employees and we abide by university standards, and we want to do the best by the university. And there are points where we are individuals, and that we may do things that, may not be in the pursuit of supporting the responsible exercise of academic freedom of others in the point of University of Florida. What is the test for supporting the responsible exercise of academic freedom of others if I'm acting as an individual, even though I'm also a TA and also employee, but I'm not acting in that capacity at that current moment, right? How does the university feel about those things? What does responsible exercise of academic freedom of others and supporting that mean, when I am living my life 24/7, right? And we want to make it very clear that we are appreciative and we support doing these things as employees and as individuals. But we don't want to be under a constant test by the University of Florida to do these things 24/7 when we are acting as individuals. We want to make that very clear that we have those lives outside of the University of Florida, which is why we added that line saying when acting as an individual, you have these specific things, because it says when you are someone that is not acting as an employee, you're not, bound by the provisions of this contract as they apply to you as an individual. You aren't responsible for the competent performance and duties of others. You are
Right.
an individual. So we wanted to make it very clear that there was a distinction between those two parts of what a GA is.
Yeah, I think that, well, I would at least say that I think that in lines 14 through 16, it kind of sets up that relationship by putting it in the context. But I understand kind of what you're saying. You're in pragmatic sense and in just a practical way, without necessarily all the legalese language, is like, look, when I'm not part of, I want to make sure that the university, and this is what I think I'm hearing you say, when I'm not functioning in my official capacity as a GA, I don't want to be worried that my boss is looking over my shoulder. And again, I'm trying to put that in a way that may be very colloquial, but that's what I feel like I'm kind of.
In a very general sense, you want to say, even though if I'm not getting paid right now, I am still an employee of the university, but I am not acting as an employee, and there should be no repercussions from these sort of senses in terms of,
Right.
if I'm being, very political as an individual, are there any repercussions beyond those that already exist with law and how those interact with
Sure.
those sort of things, right?
Sure, and I think practically speaking, and it's an important sentiment. I mean, I don't want to minimize the sentiment, but I think that, we believe that sentiment is encapsulated in line 8 when it discusses speaking, writing, or acting in an atmosphere of freedom and confidence. Again, I think that, well, let me continue. I don't need to keep saying the same thing over and over again. When we get down to 9.2, you all had asked for a couple things to be stricken, and we have agreed to strike them. The first of which is the word ethical in line 29, which we've agreed to strike. And then also you asked to strike the phrase intellectual mentor, which was in line 32. We've agreed to take that out. I believe down in lines 42 through 46. That should all be exactly as you all had proposed it. You had recommended some changes in 45 through 46. We've accepted those. Similarly, and a lot of this was from lines 48 through 65. A lot of that was not actually deleted, but Hannah had sort of reorganized it and redistributed it throughout the article. And I think that we have accepted all those strikes.
Right.
In terms of where they have now been moved to. So I think that we don't have any feedback on lines 50 through 67.
You say until 57?
No, through
67,
67,
okay.
yeah. The next question we just wanted to make sure, because we had so much conversation about line 80, our understanding is that you were. Where do we stand on line 80 with respect to recording class discussion without permission? You all are okay with having that not be specifically listed?
Yes, because that was something we had a discussion, and as TAs, we want to make sure that they are safe and have their rights not violated, but it's also state law that people are allowed to do that, and we want to make sure that that wasn't our intent to go against that state law. We want to make sure that that's there, so we're happy with that change. Yeah.
Okay, just like I said, we had so much discussion about it. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page on that one.
Yep.
And then the only other change is really in lines 96 through 98. You all had suggested, and Hannah had even put in the comment, we're not 100% sure how to word it, so feel free to add or change. The sentence previously had been, in upholding academic freedom and research, the university will not hinder any GA in their endeavor to explore avenues of scholarship, research, and creative expression, and present their research to others as they see fit, in an atmosphere of freedom and confidence. So here, in a general sense, here's where we struggled with that. you know, the role of a GA or an RA is not to have complete, unfettered, unhindered, unguided research pursuit. You know, it's happening within the context of a PI. It's not, you know, there's no direct contract with a GA to be completely on their own, pursuing their own unfiltered research. And I think that that's what, that's one of the reasons we have an aversion to that statement, because we want to make it very clear. There's a big difference between in the context of research, the academic freedom that we provide faculty, which I believe may have been where some of this may have come from, was the faculty contract. I don't know, but I think that's where some of the sentiment came from. I just don't believe it occurs in the same, it's not the same for a GA that it would be for a faculty member. But we had a lot of conversations. Tom in particular had some thoughts. I don't know if you wanted to share sort of any part of that conversation that you and I had about it. It is different.
Right.
This is something that is different. It's not like the ability to assign a grade. It is not, it is a different level of academic freedom.
Yeah, I think you summarized it well, at least in the context of being a graduate assistant versus the type of research you might be doing outside of that or outside of class. That wouldn't be restricted, but also not in the contract.
Right.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
It wouldn't be,
The
yeah.
last.
It wouldn't, well, Tom said,
Yes.
research that wouldn't be in the context of your duties and responsibilities wouldn't necessarily have the same limitations that what you're doing as part of your employment.
Right, so you could still, for example, write a paper on a controversial topic in your area of expertise that's not part of your GA assignment, and that would still be protected.
Yeah, I think the point is that as part of our GA appointments, that we should have the ability to explore topics
Mhm.
that, you know, our PIs might guide us through, but the university as an institution does not have the right to say, okay, now you're not allowed to do any research on critical race theory, for instance. That's not something that we want to leave space for.
So, but what if that's not part of your duties and like, I guess what I'm saying is if you're PI, if you're
Mhm.
working in a lab and you're working out your duties and responsibilities with your PI, and the PI says, these are the things that I want you to work on. And you're like, well, I don't want to work on that. I want to work on this instead. And you can't tell me I can't because of this contract provision.
Well, I'm telling you, our desire was to express what I said,
Mhm.
and if that sentence was not conveying that or causing
Right.
problems, that we're, like, as Hannah said, like, we're okay with changing the language as long as it conveys what we're trying to say. So, I mean, you are the expert here on the legalese, right?
So what would the constraining factor be, Eva? Like, where would the constraint be? Would it be the PI would be the constraining factor? The PI is like, no, don't do that, do this?
I would say that it should be, we're primarily concerned about the university creating some type of guideline or in a way prosecuting some type of avenue of research, generally speaking, that limits academic freedom, right?
I'm not following. Say that again. So like if the university would like reach into a faculty member's lab and is like, you can't work on that.
Mhm.
So talk about how that interacts with the role of the GA, I guess is what I'm saying.
GA would no longer be able to explore that avenue of work, right? If the GA, if the university creates guidelines for what can be researched and what can be taught in the classroom, then that is an infringement on academic freedom. Because as a GA, for instance, as a research assistant, my duty is to conduct research
Mhm.
on an area of specialization that falls in line with what my PI studies or like the lab. And if the university, for some reason, says this is no longer like, you know, allowed territory for research or a course that a TA will be teaching, then that is an infringement on academic freedom, and we want to have something in the contract that reflects that.
So it kind of sounds like you're treating the PI and the university as two different entities. When I hear that explanation, is that the intention, is that you want to treat like the PI is one stakeholder and the university represents like an umbrella different stakeholder, and then the GA obviously is the person you're representing? Is that the relationship that you envision?
I believe that's what we're trying to do. Obviously, the PI can set boundaries on research within their lab and those sort of things. We are more concerned when those boundaries are coming from those higher stakeholders who are just demanding change. Imagine I'm 3 years out of 4 into my research on critical race theory, and I'm working on my dissertation, and then the university, my PI is all on board. We've had this great conversation. We've obviously gotten through most of the process, and then the university says, well, actually, you can't do research on critical race theory anymore, right? This is not a situation that has come up, but it is one we are obviously, we're looking for protections, not for things after they happen. And if they were to come down and say, you can't do critical race theory anymore, I've just lost 3 years of work. Do I have to restart everything? What is my process for that? We don't want people falling into those sort of pits. We want people to be able to say, I want to do this avenue of research. I have that discussion and I have that approval from my PI. That's the conversation on what research I'm doing. The PI has this understanding of, they have their own different, context in academic freedom and what they're allowed to research.
Right.
As long as we are fitting those guidelines, the university above cannot say, you're actually not allowed to work on these very broad topics, these specific things that could negatively affect our academic freedom in general, if that's,
So is that more on the academic side though? Because it sounds like you're talking about your dissertation topic or your PhD project.
Yeah, I feel like it's a bleeding in of the academics,
Yeah.
like, I understand if your job assignment was to research critical race theory, and the PI, like, that's their whole
Mhm.
genre of research, and then some laws, I understand that, like, protecting that academic freedom, because it's work related. But
Right.
now we're venturing in this academic realm that I don't know if the bargaining agreement is the best place for that.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
But
It's
we
sort of
talked about how these things bleed into each other, like research assistants can be paid to conduct their dissertation work. There's a lot of research assistants that are getting paid to conduct the work that eventually becomes their dissertation, right? So
I think
it
that's
is.
true. That part is true.
And then in the
Right.
same way with teaching assistants, if they are instructors of record and they are creating their own courses, and now the university, for some reason, is saying you can no longer teach this course, that is infringing on their work.
No, I think those two things are fundamentally different. The university absolutely gets to decide what courses get taught. Yeah, we absolutely get to, now there is a faculty component that comes up through the Senate. There's an approval process. Some of the colleges have different councils that it works through. But in no way, shape or form are we going to agree to a provision that allows a GA to determine that there's going to be a course that gets taught by the university because they want to assert. That is.
What about a
bridge way too
module that
far.
is integral for the study of sociology, for instance?
But that determination wouldn't be made by a GA unless your specific GA assignment was to evaluate the curriculum of a course that was delegated to you by your PI. That would be an extremely narrowly construed GA assignment. I guess it would be possible, but it'd still have to be overseen by a faculty member, would it not?
Yeah, and it's still funded work, state
Right.
funded work.
But I'm thinking, for instance, of like introduction to psychology. That is something that I've been paid to teach.
Mhm.
It includes social psychology,
Okay,
which inherently includes certain topics that we know that Florida legislature is not really happy to be, to have taught in their schools.
okay.
So I am worried about that. I am worried about my ability to teach my students about key things in social psychology. In the same way that I would be worried for Hannah about her ability to teach certain topics that are crucial for the study of sociology.
I appreciate the sentiment, Eva, but I'm not sure how that's related to lines 98 through 100, because it's specifically talking about research.
Okay, I'm just saying, it's my general,
No,
it's
I
our general
appreciate that.
intent to
No,
like
I hear
protect
ya.
these things.
No, I understand the sentiment, but dialing it again back to the sort of the research topics and the constraints or lack of constraints on research topic selection. Again, I don't believe the university's view is that graduate assistants, whether it's in their academic pursuit or whether it's in their employment pursuit, have unfettered discernment over what they will be researching. But I don't believe that is the way that we believe that relationship currently exists.
That's funded research.
That's fun, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna be overseen and in the context of a PI.
And as I said, that our main focus is to make sure that the University of Florida is not producing some type of, you know, not guideline, but like,
Rule
And-
regulation.
yeah, regulation that inherently prohibits certain topics because they don't agree with the current, Florida political climate. Even when those topics fall within the line of what the PI's lab is and what the PIs are okay with guiding the research assistants through.
But don't we have agreement that the university is in, I mean, I think it's pretty clear from what we've already agreed upon from the parts of Article 4 that we do agree about, at least it hasn't been raised yet, that we get to determine the duties and responsibilities of the employment appointment? We get to determine the scope of what the research responsibilities would be in a given semester? I mean, I thought that was relatively settled and agreed upon
We-
contract.
I'm sorry, I'm like looking at the chat. I don't think we are agreeing that there is. The university can dictate what specific topics a research assistant is looking into. Because it seems that that would be an infringement of academic freedom. What
This
can
is
be
employed
the
part.
way that one can sort of constrict or bind the research that is being conducted is through ethical guidelines that are above the scope of, or I don't know, above or beyond the scope of the University of Florida, right? Like we have to abide by IRB, for instance.
It feels like at the high level of academic freedom, professional responsibility, that the crux of this is at the PI level. That the PI is employing the grad students, so it's their responsibility for what's going on in their lab, and
Right.
that does need protection.
Yeah.
I'll say as a faculty member in the faculty contract.
Well, and their language is very different with regard to this specific part.
Right.
Pursuit of research is I mean, the language we have for them is markedly different.
But if you're doing it as a graduate assistant, they're your supervisor, they're taking responsibility for that research agenda.
I think we should just finish up that conversation. I think we're fundamentally at odds with how we're doing that, and we can revisit and have a discussion on maybe making that more clear from what we're trying to get at there and have that discussion on here. And I appreciate you guys' conversation on that. But I do think we're just kind of fundamentally at odds on how to move forward there, and I don't think it's worth our time to waste another 20 minutes arguing about it. I think
Okay.
we made it clear that sentence could be malleable, and I think we'll malleate it ourselves.
All right, I think we have for you today.
Yeah.
So, we will plan on seeing you next Monday.
That sounds good.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Shane and Robert, I'll reach out to you guys both by, Teams probably, but it's not gonna be till I get back to the office.
I think they left, so I think it's just.
Everyone did?
Not, their team left. Okay, debrief link is in the chat.
Oh. okay.
Sorry,
No,
you had posted we were doing it. I was like, let me just get that. So click that and then I will close up this Zoom in just a minute here. I will finish up our conversation there. Oh.
Humiliated. Like, oh, I can't laugh right now.
So done with them right now. Like, what are we doing? What conversation are we having? We're just like talking in circles about this one thing.
I think it's so fucking insane. Oh, you wanna come to the table? Sure, yeah.
I would say someone's trying to join.
Oh.
Please agree.
Brief nap during the beginning.
Hey, Kirsten, thank you for joining. We just finished up bargaining, so we're actually going to the debrief chat. I don't know if you can see the previous messages, but here's.
Yeah,
the-
sorry, I joined late on it and I like left and I was trying to come back to the passcode.
You're fine. There it is. There's the passcode.
Thanks.
So we should be good. Okay, let me, and I never stopped recording, I think. Okay.